The old man had always been a familiar face in his neighborhood. People respected him not just because of his age, but because of the kindness he showed to everyone he met. He was the kind of person who would stop and help someone carry groceries, give directions to a lost tourist, or sit quietly and listen to someone who just needed to talk. Even children who had never met him seemed to instinctively know that he was a person they could trust and look up to. That morning had started like any other. He had dressed carefully in his usual neat clothes, a soft shirt, pressed pants, and his well-worn shoes that had seen countless walks through his neighborhood. He stepped outside, enjoying the cool air and the faint sound of birds singing. There was a light breeze, and he walked slowly, taking in the familiar sights of the streets he had known for decades. His neighbors waved as he passed, some calling out greetings, and he returned them with a gentle nod or a warm smile. As he approached the main road, he noticed the usual morning traffic. The sounds of engines humming and people rushing to work or school. He had crossed this street many times and felt confident and calm. But that day something felt different. A police car was parked near the corner, and two officers were standing outside, speaking in low voices but keeping an eye on the pedestrians and passing cars. He tried to ignore them and continued walking, holding his cane in one hand. The officers noticed him as he came closer. One of them stepped forward, raising his hand to signal him to stop. The old man paused, a hint of concern crossing his face. He had never had trouble with the police before, and he didn't understand why he was being singled out. He stopped and waited, keeping his hands visible and trying to show that he meant no harm. The officer approached him quickly, almost aggressively, and asked him questions in a sharp tone. "Where are you going? What are you doing here?" The old man replied politely, explaining that he was simply taking his morning walk and heading to the small market nearby. He spoke clearly and calmly, hoping to de-escalate the situation. Instead of listening, the officers continued to question him with suspicion in their voices. Their words were sharp, and their tone made it clear that they were not just curious, they were judgmental. The old man felt a sting in his chest as one of the officers muttered insults under his breath, using words that were disrespectful and aimed to belittle him because of his race and age. He kept his calm, refusing to respond in anger, though he felt the weight of the humiliation pressing down on him. People nearby began to notice the interaction. Some paused on the sidewalks, unsure whether to step in or just watch quietly. Others were already recording the scene on their phones, hoping to have a record of what was happening. The old man's face remained composed, though his eyes betrayed a quiet pain. He had faced unfairness in his life before, but this public display of disrespect was both shocking and deeply hurtful. He tried to explain again, speaking in a soft, steady voice. "I am only walking to the market, officer. I have done nothing wrong." But the officers seemed uninterested in his explanation. Their body language was rigid, their faces tight with suspicion. One of them stepped closer, invading his personal space, and demanded to see identification. The old man reached slowly into his pocket, hands trembling slightly, and handed over his ID. The officer examined it but continued to speak in a mocking tone, making comments about his age and appearance. The old man remained silent, though inside a storm of emotions churned. He thought about all the times he had tried to live a good life, to treat people with kindness and respect, and how moments like this seemed to disregard every act of decency he had ever shown. A few bystanders whispered among themselves, some shaking their heads, others looking away, uncomfortable with the tension. One young man stepped closer, speaking softly to the old man. "Sir, do you need help?" The old man shook his head gently, not wanting anyone to get involved or escalate the situation further. He had learned over the years that keeping calm, even when treated unfairly, often made the biggest difference. Despite his calm, the officer's words grew harsher. They made jokes at his expense, aimed to embarrass him, and questioned why he was in that part of town. The old man's heart ached with each insult, but he kept his composure, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing him lose control. He straightened his back, adjusted his hat, and took a deep breath, focusing on staying calm and dignified. Time seemed to stretch. Each second felt heavier than the last as the officers continued their interrogation. The old man thought about the years he had lived, the lessons he had learned, and the people he had helped. He thought about his family, the friends he had lost, and the community that had always appreciated him. He reminded himself that anger and retaliation would only make the situation worse. Then, something unexpected happened. One of the younger officers hesitated, glancing at his partner with uncertainty. There was a brief pause, a moment where the tension could have escalated or eased. The old man sensed this shift and stood even taller, holding on to his dignity with quiet strength. The bystanders also noticed the change, some holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The old man spoke again, his voice calm but firm. "I am just a man walking through my neighborhood. I have always tried to live honestly and kindly. I ask that you treat me with respect." His words were simple, yet they carried a weight of wisdom and experience that only someone who had lived a long life could have. The officers exchanged looks. Some of the harshness in their expressions softened slightly, though the situation was far from resolved. The old man continued to stand there, his patience unwavering, a picture of dignity in the face of prejudice. He did not shout, he did not argue. He simply held his ground, letting his calmness speak louder than their insults. The crowd began to murmur again, some encouraging the old man silently, others expressing frustration at the officer's behavior. One woman in the distance shook her head, whispering to her companion about how shameful it was to see someone treated this way. Children who had been watching from nearby windows leaned closer, sensing both the tension and the courage of the old man. Hours, or so it felt to the old man, passed in a blur of whispered insults, questioning glances, and nervous murmurs from bystanders. Yet he did not falter. He kept his hands visible, his cane resting gently in front of him and his gaze steady, meeting the eyes of the officers without fear. He knew that losing his composure would not help the situation, and he refused to let their words define his worth. In the midst of this, a quiet but important realization settled in the minds of some onlookers. They saw that this was not just about a single encounter. It was about respect, dignity, and the choices we make and how we treat others. The old man became more than a victim of prejudice. He became a symbol of calm resistance, of patience, and of quiet strength in the face of injustice. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a police car approached slowly, and a different presence arrived at the scene. There was a sense of relief in the crowd, a feeling that the situation might finally change. The old man remained calm, his eyes watching, his posture steady, ready to face whatever came next with the same dignity he had held throughout the ordeal. The story of this morning, filled with tension, injustice, and quiet courage, was only beginning to unfold, and everyone present felt the weight of what they had witnessed. After the tense encounter on the street, the old man continued his walk slowly, his cane tapping lightly against the pavement. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting warm light on the neighborhood, but the memory of the officer's harsh words lingered heavily in his mind. He moved with careful steps, yet his posture remained upright, a quiet assertion that he would not be diminished by what had happened. The people who had witnessed the incident were still buzzing with conversation. Some spoke angrily about the officer's behavior, shaking their heads in disbelief at the way a respected elder had been treated. Others discussed the courage the old man had shown, marveling at how he had kept his calm in the face of humiliation. Whispers of support and admiration filled the air as neighbors speculated about how the story might reach the higher authorities. News traveled quickly through the small community. By midday, the incident had been retold multiple times, each person adding their own observations and emotional reactions. Some were horrified by the injustice, others inspired by the old man's composure. A local store owner who had been watching from his shop called a friend who ran a small community news website. He recounted what had happened, describing the insults, the officer's behavior, and the old man's quiet dignity. Meanwhile, the old man arrived at the market. He walked slowly through the aisles, greeting familiar faces with a nod or a gentle smile, but his mind was still on the morning's events. He thought about how often he had experienced small injustices, subtle forms of disrespect, and even outright prejudice in his life. Each experience had left a mark, but this encounter felt sharper, more public. It was a reminder that the world could be harsh, and that not everyone recognized the value of kindness, wisdom, and experience. A few neighbors approached him, speaking in hushed tones. "Are you okay, sir?" one asked gently. The old man nodded, appreciating the concern but not wanting to dwell on the negative attention. He responded with his usual calm, "I am fine. It is important to keep our heads high and not let anger control us. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of experience, and those who listened felt the wisdom behind them. Outside the market, a small group of witnesses had gathered. Some had recorded videos on their phones, while others had taken photos. They spoke quietly among themselves about whether to share the images on social media, recognizing both the potential impact and the responsibility that came with it. A local teacher, who knew the old man personally, insisted that the story be handled with care. She emphasized that while it was important to highlight the injustice, it was equally important to honor the old man's dignity and courage. By late afternoon, the story had begun to circulate online. Community forums and social media groups discussed the incident at length. Comments ranged from outrage at the officer's behavior to admiration for the old man's restraint. Many people expressed a desire to see accountability, to ensure that such disrespect would not go unnoticed or unaddressed. The old man's name became a symbol of patience and quiet strength, inspiring those who read about the encounter. Back in the neighborhood, conversations about the incident took on a deeper tone. Parents explained to their children why the behavior of the officers was wrong and why the old man's reaction was admirable. Friends shared personal stories of similar experiences, finding comfort in the fact that they were not alone in facing prejudice. The community felt a mix of anger, sadness, and pride, a combination that only reinforced their sense of solidarity. The old man returned home that evening, walking slowly and carefully through the familiar streets. He paused at times to rest on benches, observing the changing light and the peaceful surroundings. Yet even in the quiet of his home, his mind lingered on the events of the day. He reflected on the importance of remaining calm and composed, even when treated unfairly, and on the power of dignity in the face of disrespect. His family gathered around him later that evening. They listened as he recounted the encounter, describing the officer's words and actions without bitterness, focusing instead on his own response and the lessons he had drawn from the experience. They admired his strength, feeling both sorrow and pride. The conversation shifted to the broader implications, discussing the need for education, awareness, and mutual respect within the community. Meanwhile, the local journalist continued to follow the story. They interviewed witnesses, gathering statements and verifying details. Their goal was to share the incident accurately and respectfully, highlighting both the injustice and the old man's remarkable composure. The story began to reach a wider audience, bringing attention to the issues of prejudice and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. As the evening progressed, the old man sat quietly on his porch watching the sunset. Neighbors passed by offering kind words, acknowledging his courage and expressing solidarity. Children waved from the sidewalk, and friends stopped to share a brief conversation, each gesture reinforcing the community's support. The old man appreciated these moments, understanding that true strength often lay not in confrontation, but in the quiet ways one influenced others and inspired change. Throughout the night, he reflected on the events and the reactions of the community. He thought about the power of patience, the significance of speaking truth with calm authority, and the impact that dignity can have in moments of injustice. The incident had shaken him, yes, but it had also revealed the depth of respect and care that existed within his neighborhood. The next morning, the old man prepared to leave his home again. He knew the officer's behavior would not be forgotten, and he sensed that changes might follow. The community's growing awareness, the journalist's coverage, and the conversations sparked by the incident all contributed to a sense of hope. The old man walked with the same calm determination, ready to face the day, knowing that even small acts of courage and composure could create ripples of change far beyond the moment. As he passed familiar faces, he felt the quiet encouragement of those who had witnessed the incident. Each nod, each smile, each word of support reminded him that he was not alone. The old man understood that this was a turning point, not just for himself, but for the neighborhood, the community, and perhaps even for the officers themselves. The story of what had happened was still unfolding, and he would continue to be a part of it, demonstrating the enduring power of dignity, patience, and humanity. Word of the incident spread quickly, reaching the desk of the police chief. He had a reputation for being a firm yet fair leader, someone who valued respect and accountability. When he read the detailed reports and saw the footage from witnesses, He realized this situation required immediate attention. He instructed his team to investigate the incident and requested to meet the old man in person to ensure he was safe and respected. The next morning, the old man set out for another walk, unaware that the chief had already arrived in the neighborhood. As he moved slowly down the familiar streets, the chief approached quietly, accompanied by 2 senior officers. Unlike the officers from the previous day, the chief carried a calm authority, his presence radiating respect rather than intimidation. The old man noticed the new group and paused, unsure of what to expect. The chief approached him directly and spoke in a measured, respectful tone. "Sir, I am here to apologize on behalf of the department for what happened yesterday. Your treatment was unacceptable, and I want to make sure we address this properly." The old man listened, a mixture of relief and cautious optimism in his expression. He had never expected such a gesture, but it brought a sense of reassurance. The chief turned to the officers who had been involved, standing slightly behind the old man. "You need to understand the impact of your behavior," he said firmly. "Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of trust between law enforcement and the community. Remember this moment." The officers looked uncomfortable, realizing that their actions were being held accountable. They nodded silently, understanding the gravity of the situation. Then, the chief addressed the old man again, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "Sir, you are a teacher, not in a school but in life. Your patience, your composure, your dignity under pressure teach all of us a lesson we should never forget." The old man blinked in surprise, taken aback by the recognition. He had lived a life of service and kindness. But being called a teacher by someone in authority felt both humbling and validating. The surrounding neighbors had gathered discreetly, curious about the presence of the chief. They watched quietly as the chief spoke, feeling a sense of relief that the situation was finally being handled with respect. Some whispered to each other, acknowledging that this was an important moment, a turning point not only for the old man but for the entire community. The chief and the old man walked together slowly, discussing the incident and the broader issues of respect and fairness. The old man shared his perspective, emphasizing that patience, calmness, and integrity were essential when faced with injustice. He spoke of the importance of educating others through example, showing how moral courage often required quiet resilience rather than confrontation. The chief listened attentively, nodding in agreement. He recognized that the old man's wisdom came from decades of life experience, and that his words could help shape a more respectful culture within the police department. The officers who accompanied them took notes, understanding that this moment was not just a reprimand but also a lesson in humility and human dignity. As they continued walking, the chief explained the steps that would be taken to address the incident formally. Internal reviews would be conducted, training programs would be reinforced, and accountability measures would be emphasized. The old man appreciated these efforts, knowing that real change required both acknowledgement of mistakes and proactive measures to prevent repetition. During their conversation, a few community members approached cautiously, expressing gratitude and relief. They thanked the old man for his patience and courage, sharing how his calmness had inspired them. The old man smiled gently, acknowledging their words, but he reminded them that true courage was about acting with integrity, even when no one was watching. The presence of the chief brought a noticeable shift in the neighborhood. The officers who had previously acted disrespectfully seemed smaller, less confident, as they realized that authority and accountability were not about intimidation, but about understanding and fairness. They began to reflect on their actions, questioning how they had allowed bias and frustration to guide their behavior. After a while, the chief requested a short meeting with the old man at the local community center. Inside, they discussed strategies for improving relationships between the police department and the community. The old man offered insights based on his lifelong experience in the neighborhood, emphasizing listening, patience, and consistent kindness as tools to build trust. The chief took careful notes, acknowledging that these lessons came from someone who had lived through the challenges of prejudice and understood the value of respect firsthand. The officers who accompanied them were also present in the meeting. The old man addressed them directly, his tone calm but firm. He explained how their words and actions had caused pain and mistrust, and how important it was to approach people with fairness and understanding. He did not scold or attack them personally. Instead, He focused on the principle of empathy and the responsibilities of those in authority. The officers listened quietly, the weight of the lesson sinking in. Community members gradually joined the meeting, eager to participate in the dialogue. They shared stories of their experiences with the police, highlighting areas where respect and understanding were sometimes lacking. The old man facilitated the conversation with grace, ensuring that everyone felt heard while reinforcing the importance of dignity and patience. The chief observed closely, appreciating how the old man could turn a painful experience into a powerful teaching moment. By the end of the day, the old man had not only received an apology and recognition, but had also helped initiate a dialogue that could bring meaningful change. His composure and wisdom had transformed a moment of humiliation into an opportunity for growth, understanding, and accountability. The officers who had acted wrongly were now aware of their behavior's impact and had been given a chance to reflect and improve. As the sun began to set, the old man walked home slowly, reflecting on the day. He realized that courage and dignity were not just about standing firm in the face of injustice, but also about using those moments to educate, inspire, and encourage change. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had faced adversity with patience and that his actions might ripple through the community, teaching lessons that extended far beyond the initial incident. Neighbors who had observed the day's events spoke quietly among themselves, acknowledging that they had witnessed something extraordinary. The old man had demonstrated that respect and integrity were powerful forces, capable of transforming tense situations into moments of learning and understanding. His example would be remembered not only for the courage he displayed, but also for the wisdom he shared and the change he inspired. That night, as he sat quietly in his home, the old man thought about the power of patience and the value of teaching through example. The chief's recognition, the community's support, and the officer's opportunity to learn reinforced his belief that dignity and respect could prevail even in the face of prejudice. The story of the day would continue to unfold, leaving a lasting impression on everyone involved and inspiring others to act with integrity, kindness, and courage in their own lives. After the police chief's intervention, the old man noticed a subtle but important change in his neighborhood. The officers who had acted disrespectfully the day before were no longer walking with the same harsh confidence. Their expressions carried uncertainty, as if they were beginning to reflect on their actions. The chief's words had clearly left an impact, reminding them that authority must be paired with respect. Community members continued to speak about the incident. Conversations in homes, schools, and local shops revolved around the lessons of dignity, patience, and accountability. Parents explained to their children how important it was to treat others with kindness, and neighbors discussed the impact of prejudice and the need to challenge it in everyday life. The old man's calm and measured response had become a teaching tool, not just for the police officers, but for everyone who had witnessed or heard about the incident. The old man himself began to reflect deeply on what had happened. He understood that personal composure was only one part of dealing with injustice. Education and awareness were equally important. He started thinking about ways he could share his experience more broadly, using it as an opportunity to foster understanding and empathy within the community. The officers involved were instructed to attend additional training sessions. These sessions focused on respect, bias awareness, and community engagement. They were encouraged to reflect on their behavior and understand the impact of their actions. For some, this was a difficult process. They had to confront the reality that they had allowed prejudice and frustration to influence their conduct. The old man's calm authority had created a mirror for them, showing the behavior they should have displayed. A meeting was arranged between the old man, the officers, and several community leaders. The purpose of the meeting was to promote dialogue, encourage understanding, and prevent similar incidents in the future. The old man spoke first, emphasizing the importance of empathy, patience, and moral courage. He explained that respect should never be conditional and that everyone, regardless of age, race, or status, deserved dignity. The officers listened quietly, their initial defensiveness replaced by a growing awareness. They began to ask questions about how they could improve and how to build trust with the community. The old man offered guidance, not as an authority figure over them, but as someone who had lived long enough to understand the consequences of disrespect and the power of patience. He spoke about the ripple effect of actions, how one small gesture of kindness or one instance of composure could influence countless others. Community members shared their thoughts as well. They spoke about their own experiences with prejudice, the fear and frustration it caused, and how the old man's response had inspired them. The atmosphere was charged with emotion but also with hope. People realized that while injustice could not always be avoided, the way one responded could make a profound difference. Local media coverage of the meeting and the events surrounding it helped amplify the message. The story was shared in a way that highlighted both the injustice and the opportunity for learning and change. Viewers and readers were drawn not only to the drama of the initial incident, but also to the deeper lessons about patience, dignity, and accountability. The old man's story became a source of inspiration, demonstrating how personal integrity could spark broader social reflection. As days passed, the neighborhood began to notice positive changes. Police officers on routine patrols interacted with residents more respectfully, paying attention to the ways they communicated and ensuring that their actions were fair and considerate. Community engagement programs were strengthened, with workshops on respect, cultural awareness, and communication skills. The old man continued his walks, greeting neighbors and occasionally offering advice or encouragement, quietly serving as a symbol of patience and dignity. The officers involved also started sharing their experiences with colleagues, acknowledging their mistakes and discussing the lessons they had learned. Their stories became examples within the department, showing how accountability and humility could lead to personal growth and better community relations. The old man's influence extended further than he could have imagined, touching not just the individuals directly involved, but also the wider network of law enforcement professionals. The old man found himself reflecting on the balance between justice and understanding. He realized that while punishment or correction was sometimes necessary, true change came from awareness, education, and a willingness to see the humanity in others. His calm and measured approach had not only protected his dignity, but it also created an opportunity for meaningful dialogue and reflection. Throughout this period, neighbors often stopped to check on him, expressing concern and gratitude. Their support reinforced his belief in the strength of community and the importance of collective action. The old man encouraged them to continue advocating for respect, fairness, and understanding in their daily lives, emphasizing that everyone had a role to play in shaping a more compassionate society. Even as the old man resumed his daily routines, the memory of the initial incident remained vivid. It served as a reminder that vigilance, patience, and courage were necessary in the face of prejudice and disrespect. Yet he also felt a sense of hope and accomplishment, knowing that his response had led to reflection, accountability, and positive change. In the evenings, he would often sit quietly on his porch observing the neighborhood and the subtle improvements taking place. Children played safely, neighbors conversed openly, and police officers moved with a newfound awareness and respect. The old man's quiet influence had helped to foster a sense of trust and understanding, proving that dignity, patience, and moral courage could indeed change hearts and minds. Through this process, the old man came to understand that his role as a teacher extended beyond immediate interactions. By exemplifying patience, composure, and integrity, he had taught lessons that resonated with individuals and the broader community alike. The officers, the neighbors, the children, and even the local media had been part of a larger narrative, one that emphasized the enduring power of respect, understanding, and human decency. The days and weeks following the incident marked a period of quiet transformation in the old man's neighborhood. He continued his daily routines with the same gentle consistency, walking through familiar streets, greeting neighbors, and offering quiet encouragement to those he encountered. But beneath the calm exterior, he knew the ripple effects of the event were unfolding in meaningful ways. The officers who had once displayed harsh behavior had been through extensive training and reflection. They now approached their duties with a greater sense of awareness, understanding that respect and fairness were not optional, but essential in maintaining trust within the community. They began actively listening to residents, engaging in courteous conversations, and ensuring their actions reflected integrity. The old man observed these changes with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that patience and dignity could indeed inspire growth even in those who had initially acted wrongly. Community members also embraced the lessons that had emerged from the incident. Families discussed the importance of respect and empathy at home. Children observed the old man's example, and local schools incorporated conversations about integrity and moral courage into their lessons. The incident had become more than a single event. It had grown into a shared story of accountability, reflection, and positive change. The old man often found himself at the center of small gatherings, where neighbors and friends sought his advice or simply wished to express gratitude. He spoke humbly, emphasizing that anyone could face moments of injustice and that the key to handling them lay in patience, composure, and acting with integrity. He reminded them that moral courage was about standing firm in one's principles without seeking confrontation, showing that strength was often quiet rather than loud. As the weeks turned into months, the local police department continued to monitor community relations closely. Officers who had once been distant or dismissive began attending community events, participating in dialogues, and learning to engage residents with respect and empathy. The old man occasionally met with the chief to share insights, ensuring that the lessons from the incident were embedded into the department's culture. The old man also took time to reflect on his own life. He remembered the many challenges he had faced, the moments of injustice he had endured, and the times when his patience had been tested. He understood that these experiences had shaped him into a person capable of facing adversity with calm resilience. The incident with the officers was yet another chapter in a long story of perseverance, wisdom, and quiet courage. Local media coverage continued to highlight the transformation that had followed the incident. Stories of the old man's composure and the officers' subsequent reflection and training served as an inspiration to others. People across different neighborhoods shared similar experiences, finding hope in the fact that dignity and patience could lead to meaningful change. The old man's story became a symbol of moral strength, a reminder that even in moments of humiliation or prejudice, one's response could shape the future. The old man's relationships within the community strengthened further. Neighbors greeted him with warmth, children waved from sidewalks, and friends sought his perspective on various matters. His example had created an environment where mutual respect and understanding were increasingly valued. People recognized that dignity, empathy, and patience were not just abstract ideals but practical ways to improve everyday life. Even the officers themselves began to share the lessons they had learned. In internal meetings, they recounted the impact of the old man's calm and dignified behavior, discussing how it had reshaped their understanding of respect and accountability. Their reflections became teaching points for new recruits, reinforcing the importance of fairness, empathy, and professionalism in law enforcement. The old man's influence extended far beyond his immediate neighborhood, contributing to a culture of reflection and improvement within the department. The old man remained humble throughout the entire process. He did not seek recognition or praise, but found satisfaction in knowing that his actions had inspired reflection, dialogue, and positive change. He continued to live his life with the same quiet dignity, understanding that true impact often came from consistent, thoughtful actions rather than dramatic gestures. Over time, the community experienced a sense of renewal. Residents reported feeling safer, more respected, and more connected to the police department. Community events were organized with greater collaboration, and programs emphasizing respect, empathy, and communication became more common. The old man's influence was felt in subtle but meaningful ways, shaping interactions and attitudes throughout the neighborhood. At home, he reflected on the lessons learned. He recognized that life was full of challenges, and that patience and dignity were essential tools for navigating them. He understood that change was possible, even in situations that seemed discouraging or unjust, and that one person's example could influence many. The incident with the officers had shown that courage did not always roar. Sometimes it was the quiet voice that called for fairness, respect, and understanding. As evening descended on the neighborhood, the old man would sit on his porch watching the streets he had known for decades. Children played safely, neighbors shared smiles and greetings, and the police officers moved with renewed awareness and respect. He felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his patience and dignity had contributed to a broader transformation. The story of the incident and the lessons it carried would remain with the community for years to come, inspiring others to act with integrity, compassion, and moral courage. In the end, the old man understood that life's greatest lessons often came through trials, and that moments of challenge could become opportunities for growth. reflection, and change. The incident with the officers, once a source of humiliation and tension, had evolved into a testament to the power of patience, dignity, and quiet courage. His legacy was not built on words or recognition, but on the enduring example he set, showing that one person's steadfast commitment to respect and integrity could indeed make a lasting difference.